Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in 1 Kings chapter 22. Now, this is a kind of a long chapter, so I may do this in two sessions. In fact, I think I pretty much will do this in two sessions because there's a couple of things I want to deal with that, again, is kind of amazing here. And the first part is we're going to come across the king Jehoshaphat. Let me show my chart again. And this is the kings of Israel, of course. The kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. We're going to get more into Jehoshaphat when we get to Chronicles. Now remember, as the Old Testament narrative is laid out. First Kings deals primarily with the kings of Israel. In other words, you see more of them, and then we see the overlapping of the kings of Judah, and Jehoshaphat is one of the kings of Judah. Now, other thing that's important about this is that you're going to see more of an emphasis in Chronicles because specifically, Chronicles deals with the line of Jesus, okay? And so that's why it's going to be most important for the kings of Judah. Now, the king of Judah is also going to have more spiritual, more of a religious connotation as the kings, the writings of the kings, we see a lot more political. So as you can see, political angle. So you see Jehoshaphat here who overlaps with Ahab, okay? And so not much in this is going to be discussed here other than as we come to the end of Ahab, a pathetic, sad end, we see Jehoshaphat comes up, and this is amazing. He's one of the amazing people. When I say amazing, because he's incredibly foolish, and we're going to see he's going to even be rebuked for this later. That he allies with this wicked king Ahab. Now, unfortunately, we see the same with a lot of people. The character, this character flaw in leaders, how they were aligned with people that they know are evil. We see it in police forces. We see it in every leadership area. We see this. And unfortunately, this is why things don't get done. Justice is not carried out, so forth and so on. Jehoshaphat is a good king. Okay? Jehoshaphat is a good king. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and tell the story because the stupidity of Jehoshaphat is amazing here. Ahab is going to say, hey, why don't you come to battle with me? And Jehoshaphat is going to say, hey, we're brothers, right? We're brothers. Jehoshaphat, Ahab is going to get Jehoshaphat to dress up like the king. Amazing, right? He's going to have him dress up like the king. And then Jehoshaphat is going to be stupid enough to do it. What baffles me is why is Jehoshaphat this stupid? Seriously, why is Jehoshaphat this stupid? All right, let's get into it. Like I say, I'm probably going to do two because this is again interesting. All right, so let's go up and let's go to 1 Kings chapter 22. It says there was a lure of 3 years without war between Aram and Israel. Now, so understand this. Well, let's go ahead. So, verse 2. However, in the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went to visit the king of Israel. The king of Israel said to his servants, don't you know that Ramoth Gilead is ours, but we have failed to take it from the hand of the kings of Aram? And he asked Jehoshaphat, will you go with me to fight Ramoth Gilead? Now let's go back, because remember, this king, Aram or Syria, okay, whom God told to destroy, and he failed to destroy him. Not only did Ahab fail to destroy him, but we kind of see the same thing right here. He has mercy on a king who is more wicked and evil than he is. And then God rebukes him, you remember. God comes along and says, hey, I decreed this man, and I want to be careful about the word. I want to be careful about the word decree here, but basically what God was telling him, I set this man for destruction and you let him go. In other words, when we talk about armies or human hands, this is one of the ways God uses to judge. So, for example, we're going to see this, of course, God is going to use Nebuchadnezzar, right, to judge Israel. They're going to be his vessels to destruction, okay? God also could use his power, right? God could use the elements, and then his own power he could use. Mostly you could say he probably uses human hands, human instruments, wicked against the other. So this is why he says that, okay, I decreed in the sense that you was to be an instrument to destroy him and you let him go. Okay, and remember he tells one prophet, strike me, and the prophet didn't. And an illustration, he said, the prophet tells another prophet, strike me, and he didn't. So the prophet said, okay, well, you're going to die by a lion, because he gets eaten by a lion. This is all kind of imagery to Ahab, because the same thing happened. Ahab, I told you to strike down Aram, you didn't. So now guess what? You're going to be stricken down. So now we come here and we see this. So the result of this, now guess what? 3 years later, here comes Ahab. Had he obeyed God, he wouldn't have had this problem. Okay? He wouldn't have had this problem. So now, Jehoshaphat, right? And this is a very weird time for Israel, because one God, but two separate governments. Okay? So one God, two separate governments. And as of right now, Jehoshaphat kingdom is an entirely different kingdom than Ahab of Israel. Weird, because they both serve the same God, both are theocracies, okay? And the theocracy, of course, is God ruled. America is not a theocracy. And despite how people want America to be a theocracy, it can't, because God, in a sense, is not ruling the way he did in Israel. And you will know it when God is ruling from a theocracy. And so in both cases, God is ruling two separate nations. And by the way, by the same law. That's weird. Think about that. By the same law of Moses, both are being ruled by the same law. Now, neither is really obeying the law. Israel even worse. Okay, Israel is not obeying the law at all. In other words, you could think about this now. For all this time, There's been no Passovers. There's been no sacrifices. I mean, not the way the law says. And certainly not with Israel. On Israel's side, go back to these kings here, right? On Israel's side, there's been no Passover. Why? Because you have to come to Jerusalem in order to have the Passover. There are 3 festivals that's supposed to take place in Israel. They have not been doing these festivals. They have not been doing the Passover. And they certainly have not been keeping the Sabbath. Okay? However, still the law. Still the law. Still the law. Now, Jehoshaphat is one of the good kings. But as I said, he is incredibly, to me, stupid and foolish. He visits the king, nothing wrong here. But then the king says, he says, I didn't take Ramoth Gilead, right? But when you go to war with me, in other words, he's going to pick the war. I'm going to go take this land. Now remember, King Aram said, hey man, I'm going to restore all your land, and I'm so grateful that you didn't kill me, right? All right, but now he has to go to war. What happened to that treaty? All right, so verse 4. So he asked Jehoshaphat, "Will you go to war and go with me to fight Ramoth Gilead?" Jehoshaphat replied to the king of Israel, "I am as you are, my people are as your people, and my horses as your horses." So, on the one hand, this is good, but then on the other hand, no, they're not. Ahab is very evil. Why would you align yourself with that person and say, we're the same? Jehoshaphat wasn't like this. Jehoshaphat was a good king, for the most part. Verse 5. But Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, "First, please ask what the Lord's will is." Now, there's so much wrong with this here. There is so much wrong with this here, and I'm going to tell you why. He says, ask what the will of the Lord is. And here is the problem when, as Christians, here's our takeaway from this as Christians. When we ally with the world, when we expect the world to be godly, when we expect the world to be just, and they're not. You know, they're the famous phrase now that it says, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Dr. Maya Angelou. Brilliant words that we often don't heed. So what's wrong with this here is that Jehoshaphat is treating Ahab as if he's like Jehoshaphat, a godly person. Ahab is not a godly person. He is a wicked person. Jehoshaphat's approach to Ahab should be, this is an exceedingly wicked man, and deal with him on that level. Not, well, this man is, we're the same. And so now he's asking foolishly, right? Well, let's seek the will of the Lord. Well, Ahab is not into that. All right, so verse 6. So the king of Israel gathered the prophets, about 400 men, and asked them, should I go up to Ramoth Gilead for war, or should I refrain? They replied, march up, and the Lord will hand it over to the king. But Jehoshaphat asked, is there a prophet of Yahweh here anymore? Let him ask him. Now again, Jehoshaphat is not getting the message. If you have to ask that, Jehoshaphat, what's wrong with this picture? Think about this. If you have to ask Jehoshaphat, what is wrong with this picture? What is wrong with you? Now, all these 400 prophets, false prophets, and wait a minute. that Jehoshaphat readily recognized these are not true prophets of God. Jehoshaphat, why are you there? Verse 8. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, there is still one man who can ask Yahweh, but I hate him because he never prophesies good about me, but only disaster. He is Micaiah, son of Imlah. And the king shouldn't say that, Jehoshaphat replied. That's it? Remember, that's your best response, Jehoshaphat? Now, as I said, oftentimes we see this today with leaders, right? If I wanted to say how Christians treated a certain president, a certain recent president, right? How they still treat the former president. Just like this. And when the man continuously shows you who he is, you ignore that. They call it mulligans. They call it mulligans. Verse 10. Now the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, clothed in royal attire, were each sitting on his own throne, and they were in the threshing floor at the entrance of Samaria's gate. And all the prophets were prophesying in front of them. Now we've already established these are false prophets. Jehoshaphat and none of these guys are real true prophets of God. Clearly, right? He knows this. It is kind of funny that they all sat around with their nice little thrones. So, verse 11. Then Zedekiah, son of Chenaanah, made iron horns and said, "This is what the Lord says. You will gore the Arameans with these until they are finished off." And all the prophets were prophesying the same. March up to Ramoth Gilead and succeed, for the Lord will hand it over to the king. Now, this is kind of interesting because, again, I want to indulge myself here. Come out of this, I'm going to pick this up later because this is very interesting. Notice these false prophets right here. There is a Christian network. There's a Word of Faith network. And they have prophets on there, and they all prophesied, right, that the former president was going to get a second term. They prophesied this, right? And they almost make this scene right here, right? Horns of iron. They're gonna go out. He's gonna win, and then they all failed. The prophecies all failed, and they're still prophesying. Thank God we don't live in those times. Okay, in this case, all of them are going to come to their end, but thank God we don't live in the time. But these guys are still prophesying these false prophecies. And again, clearly, you can tell that they are false prophets. Okay, we're going to pick this up in chapter 2, guys. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to like and share these videos. And welcome all of your comments. All comments are welcome. I will see you in the next study.